Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel, and today we have another Quebec election update. Now, you might say, another? When was the last one? Well, the last one would have been the last election. So this is the first one since the last election. Now, I am going to start over the next course of several months doing inter-election coverage for some provinces that have more polling data. Quebec is one of them. Quebec actually has quite a lot of polls since the last election. I believe we are at, 12? So there's actually quite a bit of data coming out. So I'm gonna start doing some of these, just so people can have an idea of what's going on and what the maps look like. So here we go. Now, before I begin, I just once again like to shout out all of my members. Thank you for helping the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. I could not really do this without you. I guess I could technically, but it would cost money. This way it doesn't cost me money, so that's great. If you want to support the channel, by all means go below and join. Otherwise, if you can't afford to do that, I understand. Inflation and times are tough, so in which case, just do your regular YouTube things like share, subscribe, and comment below. With no further ado, let us begin. So, a lot has happened in Quebec since 2022, and I will just, right off the bat, just say and admit to my longtime viewers, my new viewers might not have seen this series, or the original Quebec coverage last year, but I was wrong. I thought the Parti Québécois was in rough situation and was just limping along. I actually made several videos where I was basically saying that, where they seemed doomed. I was wrong. Turns out, which I probably should have figured this out at the time, but mistakes happen. Having a young, charismatic leader like Plamondon can matter a lot. Can matter quite a bit. So the Parti Québécois has really come back and is now the main challenge to Legault's CAQ. If you look at the most recent polls, the Parti Québécois actually has a 6-point lead. And if you look at places like 338, he has the Parti Québécois actually leading in seat projection right now. 57 to 27, and at 27 is the Liberals, not the CAQ. CAQ's falling all the way down to third, according to 338. Now, I don't think 338 is wrong per se. Now, I obviously don't have the same projection as him, and I understand how he gets his projection. He has a much more aggressive recency bias behind it. I do not. However, I still stand by this to this day, and I always will. I don't think very high recency bias makes a lot of sense between elections, because there's self-selection bias in people who respond to polls. People who are just disengaged, don't really care about the political process, but will vote, often don't respond to polls between elections. Things are more toss-up in the air. People are paying less attention. So movement isn't necessarily real. If it's sustained and it's high enough, yes, of course. My model will trend towards that, the same way that 338 does. Mine is just slower on purpose. But even with that, this is still significant. The Parti Québécois is gaining 28 seats here. And in the process, there's another 3 or 4 seats that are the CAQ are losing to the Liberals or to the Conservatives in a crossfire. Quite dramatic, really. So why? What has caused the Parti Québécois to really resurge here? Why is the CAQ seemingly stumbling? Possibly fatally stumbling, at least for Legault's premiership? Well, it boils down to several things. A lot of them are small, but they do add up. So one of the first ones is Legault canceled a highway expansion plan around Quebec City. Now, he did this because it wasn't actually very popular in most of Quebec. It was popular in the Quebec City suburbs, but not most of Quebec. That's why he canceled it. Now, that by itself shouldn't really do much. Maybe it might move a few percentage points. Maybe the Conservatives gain a couple seats in the suburbs of Quebec City. But it shouldn't really do much. Yet it seems to have been a catalyst for a lot. So why would that be a catalyst? Well, it seems the backlash and the pushback from this canceling, because remember, in 2022, he campaigned quite strongly on doing this project, building this highway expansion, has seemed to have put Legault off his game. He doesn't seem to be in the right headspace, at least for now. And he's causing other smaller mistakes. And these smaller mistakes, they keep building up. He's just not as nimble. He's not as fast as he used to be. Now, to compare that, Plamondon's coming in and he's much more nimble and he's much faster. He's really hitting the CAQ where it hurts. So that's a big part of the reason. But there's more. And it really boils down fundamentally, in the case of Quebec, to demographics. So at this stage, the Liberal Party is almost exclusively the party of the Anglo and Allophone minority in Quebec. You look at it by language vote, the Liberals get only 4.7% of Francophones voting for them, and they get 44% of Anglos and Allophones. I would hazard to guess, too, that 4.7% Francophones voting for the Liberals are very likely in bilingual communities where they don't use French that much. I can't assert this for certain, but that is my suspicion. Places like Montreal, where you could theoretically get by with very little French. Or places like Quebec or Gatineau, where you might speak French in Gatineau, but you might commute every day to Ottawa to work. And at work, you don't really speak French. That's an example. Similarly, the Conservative Party has a big issue breaking through in Quebec, because it's also not very popular among Francophones. Now, ironically, it is strongest in the areas that are some of the strongest Francophone parts of Quebec. Notably, Quebec City and its suburbs are very Francophone. I think it's like 90%, or sorry, like 98% or something like that, or Francophone. But they're still not that popular with Francophones. Only 6.5% of Francophones are intending to vote Conservative, whereas 16.9% of Anglos are. So right off the bat, 2 of the 5 major parties are not particularly competitive because they're not very popular among Francophones. Why is that? Well, the PLQ, Liberals, really are just associated with federalism and Anglos at this point. They're effectively the Anglo party. And you can see here on this map, they basically have zero presence outside of Montreal, Gatineau, and maybe Montreal suburbs. So you see there's a little bit in Laval and some of the rest of the outskirts of Montreal. There's a little bit, but there's not much. And you would really need to see some farcical amount of vote gain for the Liberals to actually even break through in the rest of the province. And it's likely that if they gain votes, it's probably going to be getting votes from the Conservatives at this point, because it seems that they're mostly only pulling Anglos. The Conservatives, this kind of means that the Liberals have this negative brand association with a lot of Francophones, because no matter what people are telling you, or where you see, and yes, sovereignty isn't super popular by polling. It's only about 35%, give or take. Support and about 50-something% disapprove. That doesn't mean francophones aren't autonomous. Very few Quebec francophones are federalist these days. Federalism has basically lost the debate in Quebec. It's dead, effectively. The main holdouts, again, are the Anglos and the Allophones, who are the ones who are standing to lose from Quebec autonomy. Look at such the language laws that Legault has brought in as an example. The Conservatives have a very similar problem across all those fronts that I've hit for the Liberals, but they also have another problem, is that the Quebec Conservatives, at least for now, don't seem to jive well with the Quebec francophone mindset. Now, this is usually more complicated and harder to articulate than other ones I've hit before, but if you've watched enough of my videos on my channel, you'll know that I'm a strong advocate of things like generations, religions, cultures, etc. They have a character to them. People who are part of those groups inherit some of that character, just consequentially. The character of the Québécois francophone is not in jive with the policies thus far put out by the Conservative Party of Quebec. The Conservative Party of Quebec is very much like the federal Conservative Party, which also does quite poorly in Quebec. In fact, a 9.5% showing of the federal Conservatives in Quebec isn't even that unreasonable. The 12% they got in 2022 is also not that unreasonable. A little low, perhaps, but not that unreasonable. Why is that? Well, it's complicated to describe why or how, but at the core basis, the most easily exemplified version is the Québécois seem to value a state that supports its people. It's a very paternalist style of state. Effectively, someone like François Legault, in his very paternalist CAQ, is what the Québécois right lean towards. They like that style of leadership culturally. And if you go way back in the day, that's basically what Duplessis was. Apologies on pronunciation. He was in that same mold. The PCQ, the Conservatives, are more libertarianish. They're not quite libertarians, but perhaps more accurately, if you've watched my What is Conservatism video, they're more of a liberal conservative type. They're not very paternalist. The Quebec, in the mold of that video and those archetypes, the Québécois right-winger is more of a national conservative than a liberal conservative. And the Conservative Party Quebec, thus far, is more of a liberal conservative party. So it doesn't jive well with the instincts of the voters it's going for. It does okay in the Centre Appalache region and Quebec City area, because that is the part where the federal Conservative Party, which is usually neoliberal to liberal conservative, depending on who the exact leader is, that's where they're strongest. I would argue that the provincial party, which is not affiliated with the federal party yet, but the provincial party is definitely riding the coattails of the federal Conservatives, almost entirely. Now, this is not to say Eric Duhem is doing a bad job or he's a bad leader. I think he's doing an admirable job for a brand new party. In just 2 real elections, he might be gaining seats. That's pretty good. But the party is not in sync with the rest of the Québécois. So it doesn't serve as a vehicle for animus. The dislike, the discontention with Legault can't rally behind the Conservatives. Now, the same story is true with Quebec Solidaire. It's just too far to the left of the Québécois to really serve as a vehicle against Legault. There was a brief window in the early 2023 where it looked like Quebecers were possibly flirting with the Quebec Solidaire as the main opposition vehicle, but it fizzled out pretty quickly. And why is that? Well, Quebec Solidaire is a more niche party. It's quite left-wing on pretty much most issues. You could pretty much argue it's the most left-wing party in Canada. And it has a discordant policy that doesn't mesh well with Quebecois separatists, because Quebec Solidaire is a separatist party. Most Quebec separatists don't want multiculturalism. And Quebec Solidaire claims to and currently suggests that it would, if Quebec was separated under Quebec Solidaire government, it would be a multicultural, independent Quebec, which to me makes absolutely no sense. I have no possible clue why anyone would support that. That doesn't make any sense to me. I can't fathom being pro-multiculturalism but also wanting to leave Canada. What's the point? I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense to me. I can understand being a hardcore separatist and wanting to leave Canada to protect Francophone culture, but if you don't want to protect Francophone culture, why do you want to leave? That makes sense to me. If someone in the comments is a Quebec Solidaire voter or knows more about that, feel free to enlighten me. I could be missing something, missing some nuance. But that seems strange to me, but that's what their position is. And naturally, this doesn't seem to be going very well in Quebec. They have pretty much been sitting at roughly the same spot they have been for ages. And if you look at the areas and the ridings they actually win in, Central East Montreal over here, very, very urban, fairly ethnically diverse, poor. There's not many ridings in Quebec that are those combination of things. Urban, ethnically diverse, poor. And they basically win all of the ones that qualify for that. But this branding in this platform they run means they can't really stretch and capture more than that. To beat the CAQ, as long as most of Montreal is Anglophone and Allophone and is going to probably vote Liberal, any real opposition party needs to win either the suburbs of Montreal or rural Quebec. And suburbs of Montreal and rural Quebec are very Francophone, quite ethnically homogenous, and usually lean separatist or autonomist. They're definitely not multiculturalist. They strongly support things like Bill 21, which is the opposite of multiculturalism. So this is where the Parti Québécois comes in. Under their new, charismatic, and nimble leader, Plamondon, he's been able to present the party with a new face, new driving ambition, because one of the mistakes the previous leaders of the Parti Québécois made is they were walking back from separatism, because it didn't seem very popular by polling. And that was a mistake, politically, because there is really no purpose to the Parti Québécois if it's not a separatist party. There is no raison d'etre, which is why I think back then when the Parti Québécois was walking back, taking steps away from a referendum, the CAQ surged and stole a lot of Parti Québécois voters. Because basically the logic is, we're not going to get independence, we need more autonomy. Plamondon's coming in and saying, no, we're going to go for independence again. And a lot of these voters are coming back. Should be no surprise, I think, that Plamondon's success, both in 2022, where he managed to win his own seat, which is quite remarkable considering the dire straits of the party, but also in the by-election in Jean Talon recently, which was an overwhelming success by the Parti Québécois, he's able to push and turn this around. And I think this kind of tells us where things are going in Quebec going forward. Usually, every era of politics will be about defining questions. The last era in Quebec, between the Parti Québécois and the Liberals, was, should we be more integrated in Canada or should we leave? It seems we should be more integrated into Canada. The Federalist faction has been crushed. They're in disarray. They're shattered. Even if you combine the two Federalist parties together, they scarcely break 26% of the vote. And that requires them overwhelming dominance of the Anglo and Allophone minority. This era, contrastingly, now this is early yet, but this era seems to be more about autonomy versus separation. And the basic calculus of those two equations boils down to the Parti Québécois and Plamondon are saying there is no way to preserve Québécois culture in Canada. The money, the economy is not important because if we don't leave, our culture is not going to survive. The Legault and CAQ argument is, no, in Canada we can pass laws and we can do things to stymie or stop the defrancophonization of Quebec while still profiting off of being in Canada while we build up our economy and strength. The Legault argument for not separating right now is basically, we get billions of dollars of transfer payments. We leave, we'll be insolvent. We need to build our economy first, and then we leave. And that's the debate in Quebec, it seems. That's where it seems to be going. That's why you are seeing recently sniping about immigration numbers. Parti Québécois have been arguing that the CAQ hasn't been doing enough to stymie immigration into Quebec. As one example. You see also Plamondon and the Parti Québécois, though Legault and the CAQ also support this, pushing back against what they perceive as Anglo cultural artifacts. The quote-unquote parental rights debate. Parti Québécois and the CAQ have come not as strongly as, say, Blaine Higgs or Scott Moe, but have come strongly against or with supporting the parental rights side because, generally speaking, the view is that this kind of debate, the idea that there are trans children per se, is an Anglophone import. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments or if I'm misquoting here. My French is pretty bad, so I can misunderstand things at times, so I do my best. And I think we should expect to keep seeing things like this going forward. And the other thing I think might be helping Plamondon here and why he seems to be surging so much is actually Pierre Poilievre. It looks like the federal liberals are in retreat, and the federal liberals are the ones who will push most towards centralization, federalization. The conservatives are more decentralist, just innately, than the liberals are. This gives a more separatist Quebec, in theory, more leverage. It's easier to work with someone who already kind of supports you to begin with, just innately, on first principles, than it is to push against someone who innately opposes you on first principles. The Conservatives already like the idea of more autonomy. So since they already like that idea, it's not that difficult or unreasonable to want to work out things to reduce federal intrusion. Similarly, the Conservatives want to reduce federal spending. One of the biggest risks for the Quebec mindset is that if they change something like the equalization formula again, they could make it so that it's no longer as advantageous to Quebec. If it's not as advantageous to Quebec, the Legault argument is hurt. The less equalization dollars Quebec gets, the stronger the Parti Québécois argument is. If you're looking at a debate of Canadian money versus Québécois cultural survival, but you don't actually get any Canadian money, there is no debate anymore. That's it. That's finished. Which is why if you look historically, look at the last Harper government federally, you didn't actually see a quote-unquote fair equalization formula, no matter how much it makes Albertans upset. Because a fair equalization formula likely would spur, or at least push Quebec down the pipeline towards another independence referendum. In a lot of ways, the equalization payments are literally a bribe from the federal government to Quebec to disarm separatism. That's almost nakedly what they are. There's a reason why Quebec gets the lion's share of equalization payments. And interestingly enough, Legault has made the argument before that the equalization payments not only are basically naked bribe, but they're there to keep Quebec poor by poverty trapping Quebec. Legault himself actually really doesn't like equalization payments, but he wants them so he can use them to build the economy. Whether he's successful at that, I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to assess Legault's economic performance considering what happened in 2020 in the middle of his first term. His second term will have a better idea because by October 2022, COVID was pretty washed out. So we'll have a better idea by 2026 how successful he's been on the economy record. But for now, it's kind of a gray zone just because we lost. We had such a big economic shock. It's basically impossible to say how good he was on the portfolio. And that is his reasoning. That is his logic. We gotta use this federal money to rebuild things. To make Quebec richer, not just use it to pay for our budget, build the economy. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. That's what it seems to be going forward. What should we expect here? Should we expect this kind of back and forth fencing? Yes, I think so. I think we will probably see the next 3 years in Quebec, if this doesn't just fade away, if the Parti Québécois manages to stay competitive, it will be a back and forth fencing about this one debate, separatism versus autonomy. It won't be overt. It will be effectively a proxy war. It'll be fought through other issues. But watch the sides the Parti Québécois and the CAQ take on issues. not always opposed to each other, they might be working together on something, are fundamentally about this issue. And saying this, looking at this now, in our current polling, in our current demographic setup in Quebec, I don't really see this going anywhere else. In the best case scenario, let's say you had a liberal conservative electoral pact, all of the other voters, which are basically Montreal splinter votes from the Liberal Party, rally back to the Liberals and or the Conservatives. You could maybe get, well, let's just bring up the numbers here. If all of that happened, you could probably get them to collectively 30-ish%. Which, if they do things correctly, could pose a third-way threat to the autonomous separatist dichotomy, but I don't really think it's going to see that. That would require a tremendous amount of skill. It's not impossible. Watch the next liberal leader when that person is selected. They have a chance to really shake things up. Maybe if they're really skilled and really articulate, they could possibly eat the CAQ from the other direction. Maybe we could have, at least for now, a quasi-stable three-way first-past-the-post system. Not because first-past-the-post likes three-way systems, actually it abhors them, but because it's not animated by electoral politics. It's animated by a trifecta question. Federalism versus autonomy versus separatism. Though I really don't think the federalist force has the willpower or leadership to solidify like that. The next liberal leader of Quebec, or Quebec liberal leader, would need to be really skilled. And maybe they exist. Maybe. I don't know if they do. If they will, though. And that's the problem. They need to be very skilled, and they need to play this perfectly. Because the problem with someone like Dominic Anglade, and why she was so ineffective, is she was trying to copy the tone of Legault, but also the social policies, sort of Quebec Solidaire. The party, the Liberals, didn't really make any sense, because she was fighting a two-fronted battle. She was trying to fight against Quebec Solidaire through central Montreal. She was also trying to fight against Legault in the suburbs of Montreal. It is a fundamentally unwinnable war, and a classic politician mistake. You don't fight two-fronted wars. You fight one-fronted wars. Now, the corollary is, if you fight a one-fronted war, you will cause damage on the other fronts, just because of how that works. Look federally at Pierre Poilievre and his success. He's not fighting against the NDP and the Liberals and Bloc, at least for now. He's basically just fighting against the Liberals. And the NDP are getting caught in the crossfire. He's not trying to beat them. He's trying to beat the Liberals. Anglade was trying to beat Quebec Solidaire and CAQ at the same time. It was just an unwinnable fight for her. She could not do it. So the next Quebec Liberal leader needs to have a better understanding, a better viewpoint than that. I'm doubtful that that will happen. It could. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think we'll see it. But who knows? But barring that, that's the only real wild card we have here. And in fact, we almost have, in a way, having negative wild card. In that Quebec Solidaire seems to be leaning more and more into socially left-wing viewpoints, which are becoming more and more marginalized culturally in Quebec. So if that keeps getting more and more left-wing, while it's getting more and more marginalized, we should and likely could see Quebec Solidaire's vote contract. Now, it might not. This is early days yet. It's always hard to project from early trends, but that seems to be a risk. And where that goes, it's unclear. Maybe that bolsters the Liberals in Montreal. Maybe that bolsters the Parti Québécois in the rest of Quebec. For now, it's hard to say. So in summary, where does that put Quebec? Well, it puts Quebec in a very interesting spot right now, which is different in a lot of ways to the rest of Canada, which is a very boring spot. Most of Canada, we seem to be seeing the natural and expected two-party regression. For the last 30, 40 years, we've kind of had 3, 4 real parties depending on the province, and now most seem to be going back to 2 parties for the most part, which is expected in first past the post. Quebec isn't there yet. And I think the reason Quebec's not there is because the most foundational question of the day in Quebec is still sovereignty. And I don't think we will see, under first past the post, a return to a proper two-party system until that question is solved. Now, I think it is very probable and very plausible that we could see in the long term here it become Parti Québécois versus CAQ, with Quebec Solidaire and the Quebec Liberals literally just representing minority communities in Montreal and some other parts of Quebec, such as Sherbrooke. But they actually have zero chance of winning the election, where the actual election winning is done just between 2 parties. There might be 4 parties with permanent seats, maybe even 5, but only 2 parties that actually can realistically win. Now, this could be a wrench thrown into this, because I believe Plamondon has made promises that he's going to introduce electoral reform, though we've all heard that before. If he wins, I'm very doubtful that he actually will. Maybe he will, but that very rarely happens. Or if he does win, he might do the referendum, ask people what they want, which is basically just the politician saying, I actually don't want this anymore, but I feel obligated to do it, so I'm going to put it by referendum, because if I put it by referendum, it's going to fail. That's kind of what I'm expecting if he does actually win an election and he does actually decide to go through with it. Though I could also see him pull a Justin Trudeau and propose some system that is hilariously beneficial to the Parti Québécois, and then everyone else is like, no, that's a terrible system. And they're like, oh, well, everyone opposed it. I can't do it. There's too much incentive for a party that can actually win to keep the system the same for them to change the system. It might be different if they can only win a minority. But to be honest, I don't really see a possible way for the Parti Québécois to win that isn't a majority going forward. There's just so many seats that are close that if you really increase the Parti Québécois seats just a little bit, they start winning. Now, if the combined CAQ Parti Québécois vote share stuck in like 54% range, maybe a Parti Québécois minority, such as the one 338 is showing, is possible. But I don't think it will stay in that range. I think we would see more movement. Usually, it's pretty rare for governments to be stuck in minority territory like that if you see such a big swing. But who knows? It's early days yet. But that is the gist. Once again, politically, Quebec is telling us it's actually the most interesting province. There's a lot happening here. Now, I don't know how frequently I'm going to make updates for Quebec. It really depends on polls and if things are interesting happening. I'm not going to make an update. Let's say the polls stay the same, and in 6 months, I'm looking at this and it's the exact same map. Probably not going to make an update. But I might. We'll see. I make no promise to my video schedule. I might tell you something, but don't believe it's going to happen until I actually do it. If I tell you I'm not going to do it, I could still do it anyways. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next week with something else, though I just remembered I only plan on doing one more video this year. I'm going to December 18th will be the last video release, and then I'm going to go on vacation. I might do something else in the middle, like maybe a stream or something. I'm not 100% sold on or certain on that. Comment below if you really want to see a stream. Maybe I'll do one. It might not even be a political related stream. It could be something completely different. But I'll keep that posted if that's an idea people want. / I want to do. We'll see. But once again, I will see you next week.